Close your eyes for a second and imagine standing on the burning, sun-scorched, unforgiving sands of 18th century Egypt. Imagine looking out toward the horizon and staring down a literal human wall of 20,000 of the most terrifying, ruthless, and deadly elite cavalrymen ever assembled on planet Earth. These were not ordinary men. These were warriors mounted on swift, purebred Arabian warhorses, beasts trained for war since birth. They were draped in gold-embroidered silk, layered over heavy steel chainmail armor, and held double-edged scimitars forged from legendary, wavy Damascus steel. For over 600 continuous years, 6 whole centuries, no Western European army had ever managed to break these horsemen on an open battlefield. They were not viewed as simple soldiers. In the eyes of the world, they were an unstoppable force of nature, an immortal military dynasty carved directly into the ancient desert sand. But on July 21, 1798, a 28-year-old French general named Napoleon Bonaparte marched his exhausted, starving, and heat-stricken army straight into the shadow of the Great Pyramids of Giza. He brought with him a tactical vision so absurdly daring, so ruthlessly calculated, and so mathematically precise, that it was either going to be recognized as his absolute military masterpiece, or result in his total, gruesome, and utter annihilation. What unfolded over the next 120 minutes at the foot of ancient Giza didn't just shock the modern world, it completely erased a 600-year-old ruling empire in a single afternoon. But the real secret behind Napoleon's mathematically impossible victory isn't what your basic high school history textbooks tell you. It wasn't just superior European gunpowder technology, and it certainly wasn't sheer luck or chance. It was a terrifying, unbreakable human fortress, a geometric death trap designed to turn the enemy's greatest strength into their ultimate execution. Chamber. A trap that gave 20,000 elite warriors only 2 horrifying options: get shredded into pieces by cold steel bayonets and lead shot, or drown in the murky, violent depths of the Nile River. Grab a drink, settle in, and get comfortable, because today, we are breaking down every single brutal detail, secret strategy, personal tragedy, and military maneuver of one of the most consequential battles in human history. To truly understand the epic scale and sheer terror of this historical showdown, we first have to answer a crucial question: who were the Mamluks, and why did the entire Middle East tremble at the mere mention of their name for centuries? The story of the Mamluks is one of the most extraordinary and fascinating paradoxes in the entire history of global warfare. The word Mamluk literally translates in Arabic to owned, or slave. Originating centuries earlier during the Middle Ages, young Christian and pagan boys were purchased as child slaves from the Caucasus Mountains, Georgia, and the Eurasian steppes. They were torn from their families, brought to Cairo, converted to Islam, and placed into brutal, high-intensity military academies. From early childhood until full manhood, these boys knew absolutely nothing except the art of war. They were subjected to rigorous daily training in horse riding, archery, lance fighting, firearm operation, and hand-to-hand swordsmanship. They were trained to ride at full gallop while controlling massive warhorses using only the pressure of their knees, leaving both hands completely free to fire dual flintlock pistols or wield heavy, curved battle swords. Over generations, these elite, slave warriors grew so powerful, organized, and politically influential that they turned on their own masters. They overthrew the local sultans, seized control of Egypt, and forged an untouchable military aristocracy that ruled the land with an iron fist. In the 13th century, when the unstoppable Mongol hordes swept across Asia and demolished every empire in their path, it was the Mamluks who met them at the famous Battle of Ain Jalut in 1260, becoming the only military force on planet Earth to decisively crush the Mongols in open-field combat. By the year 1798, the Mamluks had ruled Egypt as absolute warlords for over 6 centuries. They wore fine, vibrant silk robes draped over steel breastplates, rode pristine pedigree Arabian stallions, and carried gold-inlaid flintlock pistols alongside scimitars forged from Damascus steel, a metal so ridiculously sharp and strong it was said it could slice a floating silk scarf in half mid-air without even slowing down. In the year 1798, Egypt was co-ruled by 2 powerful Mamluk leaders, Ibrahim Bey, who handled the political and civil administration in Cairo, and Murad Bey, the supreme military commander of the Mamluk armed forces. Murad Bey was the ultimate embodiment of Mamluk warrior culture. He was a physically imposing, battle-scarred man who had survived dozens of assassinations, palace coups, duels, and desert skirmishes. He was fiercely proud, deeply religious, and possessed an unshakable belief in the absolute superiority of his horsemen. To Murad Bey and the ruling council in Cairo, military glory belonged exclusively to the mounted knight. The idea of war was tied to individual bravery, martial elegance, horse mastery, and hand-to-hand swordsmanship. So, when news reached the palace courtyards of Cairo in early July 1798 that a massive fleet of foreign European ships had anchored near Alexandria and landed thousands of French soldiers who marched on foot, Murad Bey and his officers were not terrified, they were genuinely amused. In the eyes of the Mamluks, infantry soldiers, men who walked on their own 2 feet carrying heavy wooden muskets and backpacks, were not real warriors. They viewed infantry as mere peasants, low-class conscripts suitable only for digging trenches or serving as moving target practice for elite cavalry charges. When scouts informed Murad Bey that the invading force was led by a short, 28-year-old French general named Napoleon Bonaparte who possessed virtually no heavy cavalry units, Murad Bey openly laughed in front of his council. Historical accounts record that Murad Bey made a loud, arrogant boast to his gathered commanders. He confidently declared that he wouldn't even need his entire army to deal with the invaders. He claimed his horsemen would simply ride out into the desert sand, ride over the French soldiers like grass, chop off their heads like ripe watermelons, strip their bodies of European gold, and be back in their Cairo mansions in time for evening dinner. Murad Bey had no way of knowing that he was not dealing with a typical 18th-century European general. He was about to march his medieval military philosophy directly into a cold, mechanical, industrial killing machine. Asterisk. To understand why Napoleon was even in Egypt in the first place, we have to look at the chaotic chessboard of European geopolitics in 1798. The French Revolution had rocked the continent. France had executed its king, declared a republic, and found itself surrounded by hostile monarchies. Through sheer tactical brilliance in Italy, a young Corsican general named Napoleon Bonaparte had crushed the Austrian armies and elevated himself to national hero status in Paris. The ruling government of France, known as the Directory, was deeply paranoid about Napoleon's rising popularity. They wanted him out of Paris before he grew powerful enough to launch a political coup. At the same time, France was still at war with its greatest, wealthiest, and most relentless enemy, Great Britain. Napoleon analyzed the British Empire with ruthless precision. He knew a direct naval invasion across the English Channel was completely impossible. The British Royal Navy dominated the cold Atlantic waters. So, Napoleon proposed an audacious, unconventional alternative, an expedition to Egypt. If France could conquer Egypt, they would achieve 3 massive geopolitical goals. First, they would gain control of the Isthmus of Suez, creating a strategic foothold that could later allow France to dig a canal connecting the Mediterranean Sea directly to the Red Sea. Second, by controlling Egypt, France could completely sever Great Britain's rich overland trade and communication routes to its prize colony, India, striking a massive financial blow to the British economy. Third, Napoleon was obsessed with Alexander the Great and Julius Caesar. He dreamed of carving out a vast Eastern Empire, using Egypt as a springboard to march all the way to India and unite local forces against British rule. The French Directory jumped at the idea. They gave Napoleon 36,000 top-tier combat veterans from the Army of Italy, a massive fleet of warships, and full authority to execute the invasion. But Napoleon did something that no general in modern history had ever done before. Alongside his cannons, muskets, and soldiers, he brought along a team of over 150 of France's top intellectuals, scientists, mathematicians, engineers, cartographers, and artists, a group known as the savants. Napoleon didn't just want to conquer Egypt with steel, he wanted to study its ancient history, map its topography, build modern infrastructure, and bring Enlightenment science to the Orient. It was this exact scientific expedition that would lead to the discovery of the Rosetta Stone and birth the entire field of modern Egyptology. On May 19, 1798, a massive armada of over 300 French ships silently slipped out of the port of Toulon, sailing south into the Mediterranean Sea under the cover of absolute secrecy. The voyage across the Mediterranean was a high-stakes game of hide-and-seek played out on a massive ocean canvas. The British government had caught wind that a massive French fleet was assembling, but they had no idea where Napoleon was heading. Was he going to attack Ireland? Was he heading to Portugal? Or was he planning to sweep around to Britain itself? They dispatched their most aggressive, relentless naval commander, Admiral Horatio Nelson. Nelson took a fleet of deadly British battleships and scoured the Mediterranean, hunting frantically for the French Armada. What followed was one of the most unbelievable near-misses in naval history. On the foggy night of June 22, 1798, the British fleet actually passed right alongside the French Armada in the dark off the coast of Crete. Neither fleet saw the other due to dense fog and heavy waves. Nelson guessed that Napoleon was heading for Egypt and sailed full speed to Alexandria. But because the British ships were lighter and faster, Nelson actually arrived in Alexandria before the French did. Finding the port calm and completely empty, Nelson assumed he had guessed wrong, turned his ships around, and sailed off to search the coast of Turkey. Just 48 hours after Nelson left, on July 1, 1798, Napoleon's massive fleet pulled up to the shores of Alexandria. Knowing that Nelson could return at any second, Napoleon couldn't wait for ideal weather conditions. He ordered an immediate amphibious landing in rough seas during a pitch-black night. Hundreds of wooden rowboats capsized in the heavy surf, drowning scores of French soldiers before they even touched land. But by morning, Napoleon had managed to land nearly 5,000 troops on the beach. Without waiting to unload his heavy artillery or supplies, he immediately marched his men directly toward the walls of Alexandria. The local Ottoman garrison in Alexandria attempted to defend the ancient walls, throwing down rocks and firing old muskets. But the battle-hardened French infantry breached the gates within a few hours, swarmed the streets, and captured Alexandria before midday. Napoleon had secured his beachhead. But his true nightmare was just beginning. If capturing Alexandria was easy, the next phase of the campaign proved to be a living hell that almost destroyed the French army without a single major battle being fought. To reach Cairo, Napoleon had two choices: follow the longer, winding path along the Rosetta branch of the Nile River, or take the direct route straight across the Damanhur Desert. Eager to capture Cairo before the Mamluks could organize a defense, Napoleon chose the direct desert route. It was a catastrophic decision. The French soldiers were wearing thick, heavy, dark blue woolen uniforms designed for cold European winters. They were carrying 50-pound equipment packs, heavy muskets, and limited iron rations. As they marched deeper into the Sahara, the temperature plummeted them into an oven, reaching over 115 degrees Fahrenheit in the shade. The intense desert glare off the pale sand caused a medical condition called military ophthalmia, leaving thousands of soldiers temporarily or permanently blind. Fresh water ran out within the first 24 hours. The local Bedouin desert tribes had retreated ahead of the French column, tossing dead animal carcasses into freshwater wells or filling them up with sand. The next phase of the campaign proved to be a living hell that almost destroyed the French army without a single major battle being wells and empty mud houses. To reach Cairo, desperate men fought each other over muddy puddles of dirty water, winding path along the Rosetta branch of the Nile River, or take the direct route straight across the Damanhur hundreds of lives daily. Eager to capture Cairo, soldiers collapsed in the sand, vomiting from heat exhaustion. Napoleon chose the direct desert route. Their comrades, too weak and dehydrated to carry them, had no choice but to leave them behind to die in the sun. Heavy, dark blue psychological toll was even for cold European winters. Discipline broke down completely. They were carrying 50-pound equipment packs, officers openly wept in front of their limited iron rations. General Jean-Baptiste Kleber and General into the Sahara through their hats plummeted them into an oven, rage, reaching over 100 for dragging them into this hell's in the shade. The intense desert glare off the pale sand caused a medical condition called military ophthalmia, leaving thousands of soldiers temporarily or permanently blind. Fresh water ran out within the first 24 hours. The local Bedouin desert tribes had retreated ahead of the French column, tossing dead animal carcasses into freshwater wells or filling them up with sand. When French soldiers finally reached small desert villages, they found dry wells and empty mud houses. Desperate men fought each other over muddy puddles of dirty water, swallowing silt just to wet their swollen, cracked tongues. Heatstroke claimed hundreds of lives daily. Soldiers collapsed in the sand, vomiting from heat exhaustion. Their comrades, too weak and dehydrated to carry them, had no choice but to leave them behind to die in the sun. The psychological toll was even worse. Discipline broke down completely. Officers openly wept in front of their men. General Jean-Baptiste Kleber and General Joachim Murat threw their hats onto the sand in fits of rage, cursing Napoleon for dragging them into this hellscape. Several high